Well, shining stars, do you remember what's happening in our story? It's getting very dramatic. The last thing that happened was this strange threesome, is what they're calling it in the next chapter. Miggery Sow, the Princess P, and Roscuro were heading to the dungeon. Let's see what happens. In chapter 28, To the Dungeon. We've had that name for a chapter at least 3 times now. Do you remember? To the Dungeon. The strange threesome made their way down the golden stairs of the castle. The princess and Meg walked side by side, and Roscuro hid himself again in the pocket of Meg's apron, and Meg pointed the sharp tip of the knife at the princess's back, and together they went down, down, down. The princess was led to her fate as everyone around her slept. The king slept in his giant bed with his crown on his head and his hands crossed on his chest, dreaming of his wife, the queen. There was a bird with green and gold feathers named Philip, who was saying, "Philip, Philip, Philip," without ceasing. The cook slept, too, in a too-small bed off the kitchen, dreaming of a recipe for soup that she could not find. She can't make soup anymore, can she? "Where did I put that?" she mumbled in her sleep. "Where did that recipe go? It was for the queen's favorite soup. I must find it." And she's French all of a sudden, I don't know, in my accent. And not far from the cook, in the pantry atop the bag of flour, slept Despero the mouse, dreaming, as you know, reader, of knights in shining armor, and of darkness and of light. And in the whole of the dark and sleepy castle, there goes somebody in a noisy car, sorry. Oh, it's a motorcycle, 2 motorcycles. And in the whole of the dark and sleeping castle, there was only the light of the candle in the hand of Miggery Sow. The candle shone on the princess's dress and made it sparkle, and the princess walked tall in the light and tried not to be afraid. In this story, reader, we have talked about the heart of the mouse and the heart of the rat and the heart of the serving girl Miggery Sow, but we have not talked about the heart of the princess. Like most hearts, it was complicated, shaded with dark and dappled with light. Dappled means kind of spotted with light. The dark things in the princess's heart were there. She had a very small, very hot, burning coal of hatred for the rat who was responsible for her mother's death. And the other darkness was a tremendous sorrow, a sadness so deep that her mother was dead, and that the princess could now only talk to her mother in her dreams. And what of the light in the princess's heart? Reader, I am pleased to tell you that the P was a kind person, and perhaps more important, she was empathetic. Do you know what it means to be empathetic? I will tell you. It means that when you are being forced, taken to a dungeon, you have a large knife pointed at your back when you're trying to be brave, and you're able still to think for a moment of the person who is holding the knife. You're able to think, "Oh, poor Mig. She wants to be a princess so badly, and she thinks that this is the way. Poor, poor Mig. What must it be like to want something so desperately?" That, reader, is empathy. And now you have a small map of the princess's heart. Hatred, sorrow, kindness, empathy. The heart that she carried inside her as she went down the golden stairs and through the kitchen, and finally, just as the sky outside the castle began to lighten, down into the dark of the dungeon with the rat and the serving girl. That was short. Let's read one more short one. Chapter 39, Missing. The sun rose and shed light on what Roscuro and Miggery Sow had done, and finally Despero awoke. But alas, he awoke too late. "I haven't seen her," Louise was shouting, "and I tell you I wash my hands of her. If she's missing, I say good riddance to bad rubbish." Despero sat up. He looked behind him. Oh, his tail! Gone! Given over to the knife, and where the tail should be, nothing but a bloody stump. "And more foul play! Gregory dead!" shouted the cook. Poor old man! That rope of his broken by who knows who, and now he's lost in the dark and frightened to death because of it. It's just too much." "Oh, no," whispered Despereaux. "Oh, no, Gregory is dead." The mouse got to his feet, and he began the long climb down from the shelf. Once he was on the floor, he stuck his head around the door of the pantry and saw Cook standing in the center of the kitchen, wringing her fat hands. Beside her stood a tall woman jangling a ring of keys. "That's right," said Louise. "All the king's men was down there searching for her in that dungeon, and when they came back up, who do you think they have with them? They have that old man, dead. And now, I tell you that Mig is missing, and I say, who cares?" Despereaux made a small noise of despair. He had slept too long. The rat had already acted. The princess was gone. "What kind of world is it, Miss Louise, where a princess is taken right out from under our noses, and queens drop dead, and we cannot even take comfort in soup?" And with this, Cook started to cry. "Shh," said Louise. "I beg you, do not say that word." "Soup!" shouted Cook. "I will say it. No one can stop me. Soup, soup, soup!" And then she began to cry in earnest, wailing and sobbing. "There," said Louise, and she put a hand out to touch Cook, and Cook slapped it away. "It will be all right," said Louise. Cook brought the hem of her apron up to wipe her tears. "It won't," she said. "It won't be all right ever again. They've taken our little darling away. There ain't nothing left to live for without the princess." Despereaux was amazed to have exactly in his heart the same thing as in that ferocious, mean-hearted Cook. Louise again reached out to touch Cook, and this time Cook allowed her to put an arm around her shoulder. "What will we do? What will we do?" wailed Cook. And Louise said, "Shh, there, there." Alas, there was no one to comfort Despereaux, and there was no time anyway for him to cry. He knew what he had to do. He had to find the king. For, having heard Roscuro's plan, reader, Despereaux knew that the princess was hidden in the dungeon. And being somewhat smarter than Miggery-Sow, Despereaux sensed the terrible, unspoken truth behind Roscuro's words. He knew that Mig could never be a princess, and he knew that the rat, once he captured the pea, would never let her go. And so, the small mouse, who had been dipped in oil, covered in flour, and relieved of his tail, slipped out of the pantry and past the weeping ladies, and he went to find the king. Come back next time and we'll see what happens. I hope Despereaux finds him. Bye, shining stars.